The city of Portland, Oregon has been ravaged by war. At least that is, according to Donald Trump, who wrote on social media on Saturday. At the request of Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem, I am directing Secretary of War Pete Hegseth to provide all necessary troops to protect war-ravaged Portland and any of our ICE facilities under siege from attack by Antifa and other domestic terrorists. And adding, I am also authorizing full force if necessary. Now with that, it is not technically clear what Trump meant by full force, though you have a lot of people filling in the blanks there. And that, as you have the Pentagon saying in a statement simply that it was aware of the president's directive to mobilize military personnel to Portland. And that is, you had a departmental memo signed by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth reportedly indicating that 200 members of the Oregon National Guard will be called into federal service effective immediately for a period of 60 days. And of course, all of this, it begs the question, why? And well, Portland, it's long been a favorite target for Trump, especially since 2020 when tens of thousands of people there protested racial injustice following the murder of George Floyd. Right, and Trump, he sent hundreds of federal agents into the city with their stated purpose being protecting the federal courthouse and other federal property from vandalism. But a big thing is, this time around, we haven't seen anything close to that scale. What you've had for several months are pretty small groups of demonstrators, most nights no more than 24, reportedly camping outside of a building used by ICE in Southwest Portland. And actually, you've got the city threatening to take action against ICE for allegedly violating a conditional use permit for leasing the building that limits the number of detainees and length of time they can be held there. But in any case, clashes have occasionally broken out between the protesters and federal law enforcement at this building. And with that, you've got the New York Times reporting that the protesters chant and hold up signs and federal cars leave the building, sometimes even attempting to block the vehicles, but ultimately drawing little or no response during the day and early evening. Then they say that later in the evening, federal agents regularly leave the building to confront them and attempt to drive them away, with one protester saying they get violent, tear gas, batons, bear spray, rubber bullets, shields. And actually with that, you had a charter school renting space near the ICE facility saying they had to move out this fall, with them citing the heavy use of tear gas by federal agents and potential health risks for students. So then on the opposite side of this, you had the Trump administration attributing any violence to the protesters. And in fact, back in July, you had the Department of Homeland Security describing this ICE facility as being under siege and adding in a statement, rioters have attacked law enforcement officials, destroyed federal property, and have posted death threats at the facility. But in the face of all that, for the most part, Portland had stayed off of Trump's radar, with his attention mostly focused on cities like LA, Washington, D.C., and Chicago. That is, until earlier this month when you had Fox News airing a report claiming to show protesters wreaking havoc outside of an ICE facility in Portland. So also, notably with that, you had footage of these small, isolated anti-ICE protests that have been taking place over the past few months, mixed in with a clip from the much larger 2020 protests, which apparently misled Trump about what was really happening right now. So then you had him saying in the Oval Office the next day that Portland hadn't been on his list of cities to send troops into before, but after watching television the previous night, he may have changed his mind.
Portland is unbelievable what's going on in Portland. The destruction of the city. Well, I'm going to look at it now because I didn't know that was still going on. This has been going on for years.
And then with that, you had him once again spreading the baseless conspiracy theory that these protesters were being paid.
These are paid terrorists, okay? These are paid agitators. These are professional. I watched that last night. I'm very good at this stuff. These are paid agitators. They get paid money by radical left groups, not radical right groups, radical left groups. And they get paid a lot of money.
Right, and that, of course, ties into his recent executive order declaring Antifa a domestic terrorist organization, right? A designation that notably doesn't actually exist under US law. And that's, of course, before even mentioning that anti-fascism, like fascism itself, is a political ideology and not a specific organization. Right, but regardless, one of the things we've seen now is that these Trump threats, they've seemingly brought new life into the protests, with hundreds gathering outside of that ICE building last night. Right, and then also something else we've seen are state and local officials presenting a united front and objecting to the deployment of troops. So you had Governor Tina Kotek saying she learned of the president's declaration after waking up to the news on social media like everyone else. Also adding that she had spoken with Trump and Noem since then and made it very clear that the military is not needed in Portland.
In my conversations directly with President Trump and Secretary Noem, I have been abundantly clear with them that Portland and the state of Oregon believe in the rule of law, and we can manage our own local public safety needs. There is no insurrection, there is no threat to national security, and there is no need for military troops in our major city. Military service members should be dedicated to real emergencies.
You also had Kotek urging people in Portland to not take the bait from Trump, saying any property damage or violence of any kind will get us nowhere and will not be tolerated. And then finally, you had her saying that she believed that Trump lacked the authority to deploy federal troops to Portland and that she was coordinating with the state attorney general to see what could be done. And so very quickly, we saw state and local officials suing the Trump administration over the planned National Guard deployment, and that complaint saying that Trump's characterization of Portland as a war-ravaged community is, quote, pure fiction, and adding that it appears that the the president's false claims appear to be based on that single Fox News report that was broadcast earlier this month. And adding, the protests contained to a small area near Portland's ICE facility have been successfully managed by local law enforcement and do not in any way constitute a rebellion or danger of a rebellion. So, we're gonna have to wait to see what happens with the lawsuit because, notably a federal judge in California, they ruled earlier this month that the administration acted illegally by deploying the Guard and the Marines to Los Angeles back in June. But of course, with that, getting a decision here, it could take a while, and in the meantime, a lot can happen.